name's Daisy, and I thought that I would share a few tips and tricks on Cyanotype printing that I have come across through my experimentation with the process, as I've had a lot of time during lockdown to play around with both paper and fabric printing, and I thought that some of the things that I've learned would be helpful to you. This is a video that could be useful for either a very beginner or for someone who's already experimented with the printing process before. Before you start printing, there are a few things that you need to think about. First of all, you're working with chemicals, and when working with chemicals, you need to make sure that you're wearing gloves, especially if you're working with small children and during the washing process. You also need to think about the fact that a lot of the time you're going to be working with flowers or plants, and some flowers and plants can be poisonous or skin irritants. Foxglove is a very poisonous plant, although it's very beautiful to look at, and the euphorbia plant is a skin irritant. So just make sure you do some reading up on which plants you're working with, or at least, just to be safe, always wear gloves. You also need to think about the fact that the sun print paper is extremely sensitive to UV light. So from before you start to the very end, just always make sure that you're conscious of where your paper is, making sure it's not being exposed to light when you don't want it to be exposed to light. Otherwise, you're not going to get the sharpest prints. Before you start printing, there are a few things that you're going to need to gather. You're going to need some form of frame, whether it's glass or whether it's plastic. All you need is the back and the front of the frame. You're going to need some bulldog clips or some clothes pegs, whichever you have on hand or have access to. You're going to need some gloves, and you're going to need something to print, whether it's something you pick on the day or something that you press in advance. You're also going to need to consider whether you have somewhere that you can wash your print after you've processed it. And if you don't have a bathroom or a kitchen that's easily accessible from where you're doing your printing, then you can just use a bucket. And I'll talk a bit more about this later. But before you start printing, you just need to make sure that you have everything ready and in place so that when you are printing, you're not running around looking for items. Another thing that you might want to consider gathering before printing is some white wine vinegar. Just a little bit of it diluted into your water that you're going to wash your print in will help to increase the richness of the blues between the different tones of the blues in your print. It's not a necessary item to have in your printing process, but definitely something that you might want to consider getting before you print. The next thing that you're going to have to consider is where are you going to print, and you need 3 different locations for the 3 different parts of the printing process. They can all be essentially the same location, but the first and the last location are places that you need to block out the light. So the first place that you're going to need to find is somewhere that you can completely block out the light, and I mean completely. Whether it's drawing the curtains or going into a room and blocking out the only window, but you need to make sure that there is no sunlight coming through. You can use normal light bulb light, that's fine, that won't affect the print, but any sunlight light will start to tarnish and process the print before you've even had a chance to play with it. So whether it's in your garage or in a room in the house or in a shed, just make sure that you have a room with a tabletop that you can prepare your print before putting it outside. The second place that you need is an outside space, somewhere hopefully with direct access to sunlight. You can do this on an overcast day, but I would recommend making sure that wherever you put the print down is a place where the sun would be hitting if it was sunny at that time. So I would prefer also printing on a sunny day because it just gives you more control over the times of your prints, which I'll talk a bit about later. But yes, essentially find somewhere outside where your print won't be disturbed, no one's going to walk on it, drive on it, or trees, shadows not going to block it, and know where that is before you start the process. The third place that you're going to need is somewhere to wash your print. Now, if you aren't going to be taking your print inside the house where there's a basin, you can definitely use a bucket. I usually wash my print in the same room that I prepare it, where it's dark. You can wash your print somewhere outside. I just wouldn't recommend it because the minute you take your plant off and your frame off and expose it to light before washing it, the minute it's going to continue processing. So to have the most control over it, I would take it into another dark room, have your bucket with the white wine vinegar and wash it in there. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the frame. You don't have to use a frame. A lot of people don't use a frame. I prefer using a frame because it holds the item you're printing close to the paper and gives you a really sharp print. I recommend that your frame is bigger than the piece of paper you're printing with, and that you use some kind of clip to hold it down in place. You need to make sure that your frame is clean. You don't need the outside of a frame. You can just put that aside for now. And it needs to be able to fit your plant, and you need to be able to use the bull clips to hold it down in place. You need to think about the fact that if the glass goes over your print like this, it will leave a line wherever the edge of the glass is. So just make sure it's completely covering your print, and that when you put your bull clips on, you can do this, but if it's going to cover up your print, you're going to get that shape tanned into your print. So you definitely don't want the bull clip to be over the edge of your print like that. Another thing that you want to consider is how big your frame is. You can use any size frame, but obviously the closer in size the frame is to the print that you're making, the more control you have in terms of holding the item flat to the surface of your print. So if you have a very large frame and your clips are at the very end, then the glass has the potential to not be as tight or hold down your leaf or your flower as tight as if the clips were quite close to your print. Another thing that I definitely suggest is that you don't do more than 2 prints at the same time in one frame, and there are 2 reasons for that. The first reason is because different plants process at different times. So if you have a plant that will only need 4 minutes in the sun, and it's on the same frame on another print with a plant that you can put in the sun for 20 minutes, then you're going to have to make a decision as to whether do you underexpose one by taking it out the sun too soon, or overexpose the other by leaving it out in the sun longer. So you definitely want to do no more than 2 plants at the same time. Another reason is because different plants are different sizes. So if you had a daisy in one and a fern in another, the daisy's got quite a fat middle, which means the glass will hold the daisy but then be quite loose for the rest of your image. So if you had a fern on another piece of paper next to it, then the fern has the potential to slide around and move, and you definitely don't want that to happen. And then finally, you don't want to do all your prints in one go. You definitely want to do one at a time. You want to see how it works out in the sun, and then maybe adjust the time that you put it out in the sun and experiment. And if you just put them all out at the same time, or you just bulk make the prints, it's just going to be a one-hit wonder, and you're not really going to have the opportunity to play or experiment. So do them one at a time, learn from the last print, and just enjoy it. Next, I'm going to talk about time. How long do we leave our prints out in the sun for? Now, a lot of the timing depends on where you are, what you're printing, what time of day it is, how sunny it is outside, and just a little bit of magic, because I've printed with the same conditions in 2 different places and had different results. As a rule of thumb, anything that is white, has a light petal, or is dried, like the dried petals of a flower, will need less time in the sun, because the sun rays can penetrate through the thinness of the material that it's printing. So these geraniums, which were not dry, they were light purple, I put them out in the sun for about 4 minutes on a bright sunny day in the middle of the day, and this is the result I got. I possibly almost overexposed the image. This fern, because I know that it's not going to be translucent at all, because I know that no matter how long I leave it in the sun for, it's still going to have just the silhouette shape of the fern, just like any other household object. I put this out probably 10 to 14 minutes, which is why it's got quite a dark blue color. The maximum amount of time that you can put an object out is probably about 30 minutes. Anything that's got a nice hard silhouette outline you can leave out for as long as you want. And then you've got images like this dandelion. So I put this out in the sun for about 1 to 2 minutes. And the reason I did that is because the less time this dandelion was in the sun, the sharper the definition of the bits of the dandelion were. And because I didn't squash it in a frame, it was just kind of levitated above the print. It had the potential to move in the sun. So the less time I had it out there, the less blur it was going to give. And as you can tell, because it was only in the sun for about 1 minute to 2 minutes, it's got quite a light blue compared to this print that was out in the sun for much longer. Really, it's about experimenting, finding out what kind of light in your area works for how long with which plants. Next, you need to consider what type of print you want to achieve. There are many ways that you can print, but I'm just going to talk about 3 ways today. The first one is a silhouette print, and you can tell here by this fern that there's no details on the fern. It's purely its outline. There are a number of things that will not give you any kind of translucency, and ferns are one of them. And what that means is that when you're thinking about printing it, you are thinking about the fact that you're only going to get its outline. You're only going to have the white and the blue background. There are a number of things that make these, so any household object like keys or anything with an interesting shape that you put onto the piece of paper will leave the shape, but also just realize that anything with a green leaf or anything that's quite thick, that's not dried out, will 100% not give you any details. So you will always be making a silhouette print if you use a leaf. The next is what I call an X-ray print, and that's when the plant that you're printing is slightly translucent or at least dried out, and that will give you some really beautiful detailing. You'll be able to see the veins, and there'll be a lot of depth to it, and these are really my favorite types of prints to make. And you can definitely achieve this by drying your flowers first, but not also. Some flowers like white hydrangeas will give you this effect without having to dry them first. The third type of print, and this is not a great example of it, is a stencil or a film negative print. And that's something that you would use a transparency for, and you would use your computer to print out the image. You would put it in black and white, you would invert it if it's a photograph, and then you would print that out onto a translucency. I don't really like this process so much because I find it very tricky. First of all, one print of a translucency is not going to give you a nice sharp line. So you have to print 2 or more, and then you have to go over it with a Sharpie or a permanent marker to really make sure that you're blocking out the light. So that's a fun one that you can go and read up more about and experiment with, the film negative one, but that's not one that I really use. Maybe it's my printer that doesn't print as solid a line as I'd like. Yes, so those are the 3 different types of prints that you can consider printing before you even start. The next tip that I'm going to give you is about drying your flowers. I think that drying your flowers is one of the most important things you can do to help make sure that you get the prints that you're looking for. You don't have to do it, but it definitely helps you in 2 ways. One, it helps to draw out the moisture from the plant so that it's more translucent, and then you get a better kind of X-ray in-depth print. The second reason that drying your flowers is a good idea is because you can build up a stock, you can reprint the same flower over and over, and you can make sure that you're not endlessly just picking flowers and throwing them away. So it's a good way to kind of keep a good collection of plants around. Now, obviously, the first thing you'd probably think of is an actual flower press. I like using a flower press. It obviously gives you the best result. It squashes everything down nice and tight. It's got a strong board at the top and the bottom. You can get one of these from kind of any shop in the high street. Well, not any shop, but you can get one of these from the high street. You can get it online or at a car boot. The thing is that I was running out of space. This flower press wasn't big enough for me, and I didn't like having to unwind it every time and then have to look through the different layers to find the flowers that I was looking for. So I found it quite hard to repeatedly go back to the plants that I wanted to print for that day. Obviously, the other thing you can do if you don't have a flower press, the quick thing to do is to use a nice big book. And the great thing about a book is that if you just use the normal paper, this type of paper is the best for pressing. I've just found out recently that you shouldn't be using tissue paper or paper towels because the little pattern inside the paper towel can actually imprint onto your flower, and you don't want that. So the best paper to use is kind of dictionary book paper or newspaper. One of the solutions I've come up with is I actually cut up old boxes, like kind of any box, and make sure it's a nice hard box, and I wrap newspaper on it, and write what flower it is on top, and then press my flowers in here. Initially, obviously, it would be better if I pressed it in a book and then I put it into one of these, but it's a great way for storing the flowers and being able to go to, whichever one I'm doing for that day. On the inside, here, you will see I've got one really amazing copy. The others are all just the petals, but just by pressing it, it just makes it so papery and beautiful, and it's going to give me a really excellent print. Also, another good reason to press your flowers is because a lot of things are in some way 3D, and by pressing it, you're making it easier to get the proper shape that you're looking for. For example, These teasels were really fat and round, but by squashing them, it makes them easier to squash into the glass and to print with. The first time I printed with one of them, they was quite thick and I was really holding onto the edges of the glass, but now they're really easy to print. And another reason that pressing your flowers is important is because flowers are seasonal, and if you want to print all year round, then you're not always going to have teasels or rhododendrons or poppies or daffodils. Like right now, there's no bluebells or daffodils, so I can't print any of those until next year. Things like these beautiful rhododendrons, they print really beautifully. They give you such amazing detail, but already I can see the imprint of the tissue paper on the rhododendrons. So the final tip for pressing is just that there are some plants that are already dry, like skeleton leaves. I just thought that it would be easier for me to press it flat with some heavy glass before trying to print it, because it was all crunched up. So I carefully pushed it down on the glass and controlled it, and now it's ready to print. The reason I do it in the frame is that I can actually see how it's being squashed, because sometimes when you press your flowers, they squash in really weird directions. So you have to really kind of control the way that they're being squashed. Finally, you're going to print. So you have read all the instructions, you have collected all the items, you are ready to go. Get the piece of prepared paper and then you're going to put it onto your frame. You're then going to get your flower and you're going to put it on top of your cyanotype, and then you're going to put the glass onto the frame, and then you're going to clip it into place with the bulldog clips, making sure that you are not covering the cyanotype bit with any of the edges of the bulldog clips. Now that you've got that ready, you're going to take your frame outside and you're going to put it in a sunny spot where you know it's going to be safe. And the minute you put it into the sunny spot, you're going to turn a timer on, whether it's on your phone or whether it's a egg timer, but you just need to make sure that you're timing your print in the sun. So with this example, we've got a white hydrangea. We know it's going to be about 4 minutes, so we're going to leave it in the sun for 4 minutes. You can put your print down flat on the ground, that's fine, especially if the sun is right above. But sometimes late in the day or early in the morning, I will put my print up against a wall or a pot so the direction of the sun can be beating directly onto it. I just feel that just gives me a sharper print, but it's not a necessary step. After 4 minutes, we will go and collect our print and we'll bring it inside. And then this is what I do. So whether you're inside or outside washing your print, I make sure that I take my frame and I put it upside down. I take off the clothes pegs and then lift the back of the board up. What you'll have underneath is your print, and then under your print will be the plants. So it's the back of the print. If you keep it in that direction and then you put it into the bucket, you are almost guaranteeing that the unprocessed bit of the print is not going to see the sun. In this demonstration, I am showing you what the print looks like underneath. It will be a kind of dark green color, and then the bit where the plant was blocking will be a bit of a yellow color. Once you've put your print into the water, it's very important that you are gentle with this washing process, and also make sure that you're wearing gloves, otherwise your fingers are going to go blue. It's about 2 minutes that you should be washing your print. I would recommend that you do not directly touch the print to rub off any of the surface. Do not run it under a fast tap or spray it with water. Just really make sure that the whole time that you're being gentle. So if you do touch the print at all to wash it, just touch the corners of the print and move it back and forth in the water. You can also just agitate the print where you move the bucket from side to side if you're using a bucket, and you just need to look out for the fact that any of the residual unprocessed paint from the Cyanotype liquid is washed off. Now once your print is all washed and clean, you're then going to take your print out and you're going to hang it up to dry. You need to realize that your print will take about 24 hours to reach its fully developed color. Some people choose to speed this process up by washing their final print with some peroxide. I don't do that. I'm happy to wait the 24 hours. You will get a nice dark finished look, but it just won't be the deepest, richest blue color that you're looking for until 24 hours later. Some people at this step would like to tone their prints. I don't do this. I don't really have an interest at this time, but maybe I will later. And what this means is that your blueprint has the ability to change color to yellow, to purple, to green, to brown, to black. And there are ways that you can do this. The reason that it can change color is because the cyanotype ink is archival, which I think means that it has the ability to change color. So if you store it somewhere where it can come into contact with anything with a high pH, or if your hands aren't clean and you touch the print, it could tarnish or change the color of the print, or if you expose it to any kind of metal, it will start to change color. So just be careful with your print once you've developed it, that it's not, I mean, it's not too drastic. My prints haven't necessarily changed color and I'm touching them all the time, but just be wary that they do have the potential to change color. If you're doing fabric cyanotype printing, then you have to wash that with a non-bio wash just to make sure that it doesn't change color. If you want to know more about the toning process, you can just go online. You can go onto Jacquard's online and they have a whole PDF on the different ways to tone your prints. But at this point in time, I don't have much more information than that to give you. So that's it. You know how to do cyanotype printing now. Obviously, I've given you a bunch of rules and instructions, but you only learn the rules so that you can break them. And I've seen some really amazing work done where people don't use frames. They will put the print out in the sun and they'll just keep on adding plant matter. And then at the end of it, you get this really amazing mottled effect with all this depth. So just because I've told you a bunch of things today doesn't mean that you have to do that, but at least you know how to get the sharpest print. So yeah, go play. I'd love to see what you make. I'd love to see what kind of creativity or what plants you find and what you print. I'd also really like to know what you found helpful or useful, and whether there's anything that I missed out or I don't know about, because like I said, when I first looked online to see if there's anyone giving me tips and tricks for cyanotype printing, there wasn't very much other than very basic videos. So I really wanted to share today everything that I've learned, like squashing the flowers or pressing the flowers in the flower presses or pressing the flowers in my own kind of cardboard constructions. And hopefully that's something that can help you guys in your process. If you would like to share what you do with me, I'd love to see what you do. You can find me on Instagram under DaisyBowCraft, DaisyBow_craft, and just tag me in your post or even send it to me in a private message. I'd just love to see what you do. So yes, if there's anything I've missed out or anything else you'd like to know, please let me know. I do plan on, well, I say this now, but I do plan on making another video where I show different examples of different plants and different exposure times. So I'll do the experimentation for you and kind of tell you what I did and how I achieved that. But that's for another time. So yes, thank you very much for watching and maybe see you next time.